What if the woman everyone mocked as a fragile beauty was actually the most terrifying swordswoman in the entire kingdom? And what if she had already lived through the nightmare of killing everyone she loved? Wearing a gorgeous dress and high heels, she actually came to participate in the cruelest knight selection. At first glance, I thought she was a delicate vase that couldn't even hold a sword. But what happened next completely shattered that assumption. Unexpectedly, she waved the boulder, and the boulder instantly shattered. That single move left all the bosses in the room completely dumbfounded. The annual selection season is coming again. The gate of the Knights of the Sky has already been surrounded by water. Everyone is trying their luck, each person hoping to change their fate. But is this legendary place really that easy to get into? The two young men in charge of registration looked at the list and shook their heads. I am afraid that this year we will face the tragic situation of annihilation of the entire army. After all, to become an official knight here, the starting point is to be a master of swordsmanship. This requirement is so demanding that it makes people feel hopeless. The newcomer next to me asked stupidly, "Aren't knights supposed to be sword masters?" When my companion heard this, he rolled his eyes speechlessly. The look in his eyes was like looking at a fool. You must know that this knight order can rule the entire city. It is even known as a terrifying existence that transcends the national level. Sword masters are rare elsewhere, but here, it is just the most common standard configuration. In the Knights of the Sky, ordinary knights can skillfully use sword energy. And the strong ones standing at the top of them are the owners of the divine sword Echineacea. No wonder countless people squeeze their heads out every year just to get a chance. Even if I am just a trainee knight, I feel it is a great honor. Especially their current leader, Eurien. Not only is he the youngest leader in history, he is also the true master of the legendary sword. This title is at the ceiling level across the entire continent. Just when the two registrars were chatting happily, one of them suddenly lost his voice as if his neck was being strangled. His eyes were attracted by a figure in the crowd. That's a woman with long pink hair. The emergence of Echineacea made the originally noisy scene instantly fall into deathly silence. The atmosphere changed in a heartbeat. The registrar couldn't help but step forward to ask, "Do you really want to wear this outfit to participate in the selection?" Because she was actually wearing a gorgeous lace dress. Wearing high heels, she swaggered into the examination room as if she were entering a grand ballroom rather than the most brutal night selection. Now the candidates around were completely in a rage. Everyone was whispering in private. I think there must be something seriously wrong with this girl's brain. Dress like this to participate in the cruel night selection? It's like coming to an aristocratic ball. Echineacea just replied with a single word expressionlessly. Yes. That calm answer somehow made the entire situation even more amusing. The two registrars even started a bet on the spot. I bet she can't even hold a sword steady and will run home crying later. Just when they got excited about mocking her, suddenly, a bone-chilling voice came from behind. Ask them what the hell is going on here. This sound scared the two registrars out of their wits. The two registrars hurriedly turned around and saluted. It turns out that the person coming is none other than Eurien, the leader of the Knights of the Sky. The registrar explained tremblingly, saying they were just discussing a candidate who was behaving strangely. Eurien followed their gaze and looked over. As a result, even he looked surprised when he saw it. In the middle of the examination room, Echineacea was wearing a gorgeous lace dress. In her hand, she held a cold sword tightly. In such a serious military selection, how dare someone dress like this to cause trouble? Eurien looked at Echineacea in the distance and asked the registrar next to him, "Do you think she will fail?" The registrar replied matter-of-factly, "If you're dressed like that, you probably can't even hold a sword, and you'll definitely be eliminated." After hearing this, Eurien replied coldly, "If it were the other way around, I would definitely bet on this woman to take first place." The registrar froze. Before he could even react from the shock, Echineacea on the field had already moved. Who would have thought that she just waved her hand, and the huge test piece of wood in front of her was split in half instantly? The sword flashed. The result appeared before anyone could even understand what had happened. When the sword was struck, the whole place fell into silence. The candidates next to her were so frightened that their faces turned pale. The registrar stammered out Echineacea's name. Then he suddenly announced loudly, "Echineacea has successfully passed the pre-selection." Looking at the back of Echineacea as she sheathed her sword and left, the registrar rubbed his eyes hard and thought he was dreaming. Just then, Julian walked over and directly ordered his subordinates to retrieve her files. He looked at the identity written on the file. Julian whispered her name. Echineacea. I think this name really suits her very well. After all, a dazzling person like her, once you see her once, you will never forget her. But deep in his memory, the Echineacea of the future would not look like what she was now at all. Not only was she not a student of the Knights at that time, even her hair wasn't this dazzling rose-pink color. Looking at the radiant pink-haired girl not far away, Julian was extremely sure that she had completely changed. And this was only the beginning. The sun shines in the quiet courtyard. Echineacea is getting ready to move forward. Suddenly, a strange voice rang in her ears. It was the magic sword she wore around her waist that spoke. The demon sword asked aggrievedly, "Are you planning to throw me away again?" Hearing this, Echineacea admitted directly without hesitation. After all, she came all the way to Azenka just to get rid of this difficult trouble completely. The demon sword was completely anxious now and called her too ruthless. It hurriedly reminded her, "I taught you how to turn back time." Looking at the door slowly opening in front of her, the demon sword was still pleading for mercy. It hoped she could put the past behind her. But Echineacea didn't want to hear any nonsense from it. She simply told this cursed sword to shut up coldly. Looking at the mark on her hand, Echineacea felt resentful. If it weren't for this magic sword, she wouldn't have experienced that pain at all. This was not a treasure. It was a cursed sword that would force its holder into a path of endless killing. Everything had been completely ruined for her since she got it. She turned into a monster who only knew how to kill. She killed everyone who loved her with her own hands. Even Julian, the only one who believed in her, finally fell under her sword. Looking at Julian covered in blood in her memory, Echineacea said his name painfully. But she quickly forced herself to calm down. She must not be distracted in the slightest now. This was just the beginning. If she wanted to get rid of this cursed sword completely, she must not be distracted. The first priority now was to avoid Julian as much as possible. Then she had to find a way to successfully enter the Knights of the Sky. It didn't matter even if Julian still remembered her. After all, she looked completely different now than before. She was already 35 years old when time was reversed. And now she was 20 again. Looking at her young self in the mirror, she secretly vowed not to waste this opportunity again. Being able to live again was definitely not a gift from God. This was indeed a miracle. But this miracle had been spelled out with her own blood. Although the Rhodes family was not considered a top official family in the empire, it was also a decent family with no worries about food and clothing. Echineacea once had a happy home. She had parents who loved her and a gentle brother. At that time, she was just a girl held in the palm of her family's hand. This peaceful beauty should have lasted forever, until she got the magic sword forged with blood. As long as you touched the magic sword, your body would be completely controlled. You would become a monster who only knew slaughter and destruction. Ordinary people's bodies simply could not bear this kind of magic power. Once the host body collapsed, the magic sword would fall asleep again. But Echineacea was an exception. She was born with a high affinity for magic. This physique forcibly supported her collapsing body. As a result, she became an unrivaled swordsman genius. But at the same time, she was also completely reduced to a killing demon controlled by the magic sword. If everything could happen again, she would rather she had never touched that magic sword. Who would have thought that her great talent would be used for killing? The magic sword controlled her and killed the person she loved most. Then came the mercenaries and Templars who were famous throughout the mainland. Everyone who tried to stop her fell before her overwhelming power. Seeing the blood all over the ground, she could only pray in her heart. Why couldn't anyone come and kill her? If there really was a miracle in this world, she only hoped that she could be completely defeated that day. She had already lost everything. She didn't want to become the monster she had become. Just then, the guardian of the Empire finally arrived. Standing at the front was Eurien, holding the divine sword. And this time, everything was different. Because Echineacea was no longer the helpless woman trapped by fate. She had returned to the beginning. She had another chance. And the person standing before her was the very same man she had once lost. The same Eurien. The same divine sword. But a completely different future. The moment Echineacea saw him, countless memories rushed through her mind. Yet she remained silent. She knew that this time, she could not allow history to repeat itself. The cursed sword might still be waiting. Instead, I just hoped that the other party could win so that I could finally be relieved. After all, the person standing in front of her was Eurien, the third prince of the Empire. He even gave up his right to the throne in order to lead the knights. Such a superior person had nothing to do with her. But fate used the cruelest way to make them meet on the battlefield. Even the powerful Eurien was at a disadvantage at this time. The power of the magic sword was really terrifying. It screamed crazily in Echineacea's mind, forcing her to continue swinging her sword to kill the enemy in front of her. But deep down in her heart, she didn't want to do anything. She was desperately resisting. Seeing that the fatal blade was about to fall, she could only pray desperately in despair. She hoped Eurien could win this battle and end her pain. The battle on the battlefield had reached the most critical moment. The will of the magic sword completely suppressed Echineacea's rationality. The violent sword energy forced Eurien to retreat step by step. She couldn't control her body and could only become a killing machine. The roar of the magic sword in her mind was getting louder and louder, driving her to attack everyone in front of her. This was destined to be an irreparable tragedy. Unless there was a miracle that could cut off the shackles of this magic sword. This was the tragic crusade that year. Eurien personally led the team to encircle and suppress this terrible demon. But the four top combatants still couldn't gain an advantage over each other. Dietrich couldn't help but laugh at himself when he looked at the tragic situation in front of him. The facts were right in front of them. Even if you didn't believe it, you had to believe it. Teresa turned pale and told him to shut up. The companion next to him could only sigh helplessly. It was a pity that such a good talent was destroyed by the magic sword in the end. But who knew that this was not her choice at all? She used to be just an ordinary girl who loved to laugh. She never meant to hurt anyone. When Echineacea fell to the ground exhausted, Eurien saw no fear or hatred in her eyes. Instead, he saw endless pain and pleading. That was the cry of a soul trapped in the depths of the magic sword. She shed tears as if she was complaining about the injustice of fate. Eurien could clearly see that the devil was crying. But Dietrich next to him didn't believe it at all. He interrupted Eurien coldly. It was believed that people controlled by the magic sword had long lost their minds. But even so, she was still struggling desperately, trying to regain control of her body from the magic sword. The companions quickly dissuaded Eurien from getting closer. It was impossible for those who were entangled by the magic sword to wake up again. And the killings she committed previously were irreversible. Dietrich shouted angrily, if the Empire hadn't been foolish enough to try to control this power, things would never have reached this stage. Watching Echineacea gradually lose consciousness, Eurien slowly put away his sword and whispered, "We can't punish an innocent soul because of the crimes she was forced to commit." Dietrich thought Eurien was crazy. Usually, he respected Julien's chivalry the most. But this time, he absolutely couldn't accept it. Teresa couldn't help but ask the leader what he planned to do. Eurien did not explain. He simply bent down silently and picked up the woman lying on the ground. Then he said he would give her a chance to start over. At this moment, all the noise around seemed to have disappeared. For Echineacea, who was trapped in darkness, this sentence was the only salvation that shone into the abyss after that disaster. But what awaited her next was far more painful than anyone could imagine. Echineacea was imprisoned in the deepest dungeon. Although the heavy chains sealed the power of the magic sword, she still had to live in endless darkness every day, fighting desperately against the evil will of the magic sword. Even in the abyss of pain, she never gave up hope. She had been silently hoping in her heart. Wait until she completely regained control of her body. She wanted to wash away the dazzling bloodstains on her body, have a good sleep in a warm bed. She wanted to comb her long pink hair again, put on a skirt, and become her carefree self once more. That simple wish had become the greatest dream in her life. Julien personally came to the dungeon to visit. The guard shook his head helplessly, sighing that she still hadn't gotten any better. In fact, in Echineacea's heart, she longed so much to smile, to meet the only man who trusted her. So she kept gritting her teeth and persisting, waiting desperately for a miracle to come, so that she could atone for her sins and face him openly. But who would have thought? What awaited her was not a miracle. It was an abyss. The magic sword used trickery to manipulate the guards and quietly opened the cold prison door. Disaster struck again without warning. To protect everyone, Baron was brutally killed by the magic sword. Looking at the blood and bodies around her, Echineacea knew she could never go back. Controlled by the magic sword, she looked at the survivors coldly and declared that no one could leave there alive. Teresa, as the holder of the divine weapon, also tried her best to defend the line with her last bit of strength, fighting until the last moment of her life. In order to warn the outside world, Dietrich got on his horse and ran away with all his might. But he never expected it. The speed of the magic sword was so fast that it was despairing. He had nowhere to run. Looking at the monster approaching in front of him, Dietrich had disbelief written all over his face. In the end, he too fell. When Julien rushed back after completing his mission, the entire square had been reduced to ruins. The sight before him was almost impossible to recognize. And finally, he had to face this terrifying magic sword alone. Julien had always longed to reunite with her, but he never thought about the price of that reunion. It would be so cruel. Echineacea at this time had been completely swallowed up by the killing will of the demon sword. She had become an irrational monster. In order to prevent this catastrophe, Julien drew his sword and launched a decisive battle. But who would have thought? Even the strongest knight in the Empire, Julien, in front of the blood-drinking demon sword, had almost no way to fight back. Julien was completely defeated in this battle. He was seriously injured and fell to the ground. The trust and tenderness of the past, at this moment, seemed to completely turn into nothing. No one in this world could stop her anymore. In the abyss of pain where she was completely out of control, all she had left in her heart was endless hatred for the magic sword. She hated that it had taken away everything she had. Time flies. After 6 full years of painful days being tortured by the curse of the magic sword, in this remote fishing village, the miracle finally happened. She actually took back control of her body. The hideous curse mark on her skin completely disappeared. Her hair also turned back to its original pink color. She finally became herself again. But even after finding herself again, looking at the blood-stained magic sword in her hand, it was already too late. Important companions who had passed away could never open their eyes again. Even if she found herself again, looking at this bloody magic sword, all she was left with was anger and despair. She frantically smashed the sword against the hard ground, trying to destroy this source of evil. But everything was in vain. She cried and questioned herself. Where else can I go now? After all, she had ruined everything with her own hands. Just when she was completely confused, suddenly, a strange voice sounded in her ears. That magic sword actually spoke. It mocked her powerlessness. It said that no matter what she did, this sword would never break. Then the voice revealed its name to her. Its name was Regression. The magic sword told her proudly that now that she could hear its voice, it meant that she was qualified to become its second owner. It even hypocritically said, "Congratulations." When she heard those 2 words, she was completely consumed by rage. Because of this damn magic sword, she had lost everything. She lost her family. She lost her friends. Even Julien, the only person who believed in her, had fallen because of her. But this culprit actually had the nerve to congratulate her. The demon sword became furious when it saw her reaction. It quickly explained in a panic that she couldn't blame it for all of this. It was the human resentment sealed within its body that was causing the trouble. But she didn't want to hear these excuses at all. "Shut up!" She angrily interrupted it. The demon sword hurriedly begged for mercy, desperately asking Echineacea to hear what it had to say. But she didn't want to hear it. "Shut up!" Just then, the magic sword suddenly dropped a huge piece of news. It said there was a way to undo it all. A way to let everything go back to how it was. When she heard this, she stopped suddenly. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Can the dead be resurrected?" The magic sword explained that the dead could not actually be resurrected. But you can turn back time. Its previous owner did it once. Although it's not easy, she doesn't care about the cost, eagerly asking for methods. The demon sword then mentioned the legend about the sword of Kyosa. Just collect all 10 artificial swords of Kyosa. You can borrow the power of the divine sword. And the divine sword named Kairos Kyosa was forged from time itself. The magic sword told her that the power of the Excalibur could turn back time, but only one chance. Echineacea was a little shaken after hearing the news. She knows very well that this matter is definitely not easy. And this magic sword is probably lying to her. But looking at her hands full of blood, she still made up her mind. Even if there is only one chance in 10,000, she wants to give it a try too. To save those who died because of her on this day, she made a decision that changed her destiny. After many hardships, she finally came here. Looking at the radiant sword in front of her, she knew she was close to that miracle. Only the last step was left. Long ago, a bold blacksmith dared to openly challenge the gods, bringing punishment upon himself for his arrogance. God gave him extraordinary power, allowing him to use day and night to forge peerless weapons. God said to him, "I have given you the same power. Go create your proudest work. This is your test for the next 100 years." The blacksmith worked hard and finally forged 10 peerless swords. But just when he was complacent, with a wave of his hand, the god created 2 other divine swords. The light of these 2 divine swords completely overshadowed all the hard work of the blacksmith. The blacksmith finally understood his own insignificance. He knelt on the ground and sincerely repented. The gods eventually forgave him and took him to the divine realm. And the 12 weapons left in the world became known to the world as Kyosa. That means test. Among these weapons, the most special thing is the sword forged by time itself. And now, Echineacea finally stands in front of the divine sword. A solemn voice suddenly sounded in the temple. "Seeker who comes here, what do you really want?" To get here, it took 9 years for Echineacea. She looked at Kairos Kyosa and spoke without hesitation. "Send me back to the past. Back before I killed anyone." The voice in the temple rang again. "Why do you want to go back to the past?" Echineacea raised her head. "Because I want to save those people I killed." The voice continued to ask, "Do you want to save those who died in your hands?" Echineacea gritted her teeth and said, "I never wanted to kill them." There was a brief silence in the temple. Only the divine sword was quietly radiating light. After a while, that solemn voice sounded again. "Very good." But then the voice raised another question. "So, what are you going to do after this? What are your plans once they come back to life?" Hearing this question, Echineacea was stunned for a moment. What to do after this? She had never thought about this problem. Her only thought all this time was just to make up for the mistakes she made. As long as she could bring everyone back. As long as everything could go back to where it started. But when that familiar figure in her mind appeared again, she hesitated. She lowered her head and spoke softly. She said that she actually just wanted to live the most ordinary life. Since being entangled by the magic sword, she couldn't remember how long it had been. She had never had a good night's sleep. How long had it been since she had really laughed? Now she was just an empty shell. But if they could really turn back time, if everything could start over, she finally revealed her truest desire. "I want to be happy." Hearing this answer, the voice in the temple rang again. "Good. You who are qualified, I will give you power. To know there will never be a second miracle in this world. So try your best to find happiness." As soon as he finished speaking, the divine sword burst out with dazzling light. The powerful force directly enveloped her. When the surrounding area lit up again, everything changed. The sun shone on the gorgeous manor. Suddenly, there was a crisp sound of weapons clashing in her ears. Hearing this familiar voice, Echineacea in the room was stunned for a moment. Looking at this familiar ceiling, Echineacea couldn't believe her eyes. She got up quickly, watching herself turn back to long pink hair and this body that had completely regained control. She couldn't care about anything else. She ran outside with bare feet. The maid shouted anxiously from behind. "It's too dangerous. The training ahead is too dangerous." But when she saw that familiar figure, she rushed forward and hugged him tightly. At this moment, she was finally sure. Her family was really alive. She had returned to March 17th, 1629. That meant her destiny had been completely rewritten. The day she first picked up that magic sword, Echineacea secretly swore in her heart. She would never let tragedy happen again this time. After returning to the room, the maid Nora helped her arrange her clothes. She couldn't help nagging at the same time, complaining that it was rude for her to run around barefoot so early in the morning. Echineacea smiled and apologized to her. The maid asked her with concern if she felt unwell, because she was so noisy last night that she couldn't sleep. Hearing this, Echineacea quickly asked, "Did he really call her last night?" The maid looked confused. She said that she did have insomnia last night. "Let me bring you a cup of hot milk." Now Echineacea was completely confused. This was exactly the same as what happened before on that fateful night. The maid Nora went to the kitchen and never came back. Echineacea could only go to find her with a lantern. But the moment she opened the door, the sight in front of her completely shocked her. Standing there was not the gentle and loyal Nora at all. It was a monster controlled by a magic sword. Before she could react, the other party brandished a sharp blade and slashed at her. In the chaos, she had no memory of how she survived. When she woke up again, only the magic sword that exuded a strange aura was left lying quietly in front of her. In order to survive, she had no choice but to reach for the sword. But who would have thought that taking this sword would completely open her tragic fate? This time, however, everything was different. To find out what happened last night, Echineacea asked the maid, "Did you notice anything unusual last night?" The maid thought about it and suddenly mentioned that she was in the kitchen last night and found an empty bag she had never seen before. Hearing this clue, Echineacea immediately became alert. She asked the maid to bring her the bag. When she got the long cloth bag, she had a bad feeling in her heart. Because the size of this bag was exactly the same as that magic sword. This was definitely not a coincidence. Someone must have left the bag in the kitchen on purpose. Since the bag was empty, that meant the magic sword originally contained inside had been taken away. And this time, Nora's past had completely changed since she picked up the magic sword. What the hell was going on? Echineacea couldn't bear it anymore. She angrily questioned the magic sword in her body. Now that time has flown back, why does it still follow me? Looking at the black contract mark on the back of her hand, she had to face a cruel reality. That terrible magic sword was still with her. Echineacea was about to question the magic sword in her body when suddenly there was a knock on the door. Maid Val opened the door and walked in. She asked her softly if she wanted to join the group for dinner. Hearing the word everyone, Echineacea was in a daze for a moment. Val looked at her young lady's strange reaction. She quickly explained that it was the Earl and his wife and Master Lancelot. It didn't take long for the family to sit around the dining table, enjoying this long-lost warm time. During the dinner, the Earl suddenly mentioned that Nicole was arriving tomorrow. Lancelot on the side suddenly became excited. He shouted loudly that he must play with her when she came back. Mother was nagging softly from the side, urging Lancelot to dry his hair before coming back to the restaurant. But my father noticed something strange about Echineacea. She hadn't eaten a bite since she sat down. Looking at this warm scene in front of her, Echineacea was completely lost. The tragic scene overlapped with the warmth in front of her. She couldn't distinguish between reality and illusion for a while. In her past life memory, all the relatives in front of her had once fallen in a pool of blood. Lancelot had even questioned her while covered in blood. Why do you want to destroy it all with your own hands? But looking at her living family, there was only one strong thought left in her mind. This was why she had missed them so much. Until this moment, she finally had a real sense of rebirth. "I miss everyone," Echineacea said. Lancelot couldn't help laughing. He teased her, asking if she still hadn't woken up yet. Looking at this warm scene in front of her, Echineacea had mixed feelings in her heart. The peace that was lost. Now she was finally back with them again. Mother asked with concern, "Are you having a nightmare?" Echineacea nodded slightly. But deep inside, she knew something was wrong. Because she had already seen this night once before. And this time, she was determined to uncover the truth before the nightmare could happen again. The warm dinner continued around her. Everyone was smiling. Everyone was alive. After returning to the room, Echineacea immediately began to examine her body. Although the magic power she had just condensed was still incredibly weak, fortunately, the magic core was completely intact. This was the power that only a true sword master could condense. In her previous life, this power had been as natural to her as breathing. After she was reborn, she had actually forgotten about this important event. No wonder when she exercised a little strenuously in the morning, her body simply couldn't bear it. Now that the magic core had finally been condensed, Echineacea decided to try summoning the magic sword. As she stretched out her hand and grabbed the empty space, a magic sword radiating a cold, eerie light suddenly appeared out of thin air. The demon sword couldn't help but complain, grumbling that the way she had awakened him was far too rough. Looking at this curse that could never seem to be shaken off, Echineacea asked coldly, "Why has time flown backward, yet I still can't get rid of you?" The answer given by the magic sword instantly made her heart sink into an icy valley. Because her soul had not changed, this magic sword had long been engraved deep within her soul. The demon sword proudly told her that she had been able to be reborn with her memories precisely because she was the owner of this divine sword. Echineacea immediately understood. If she forcibly discarded this sword, she would lose all the memories of her rebirth. As for the other 10 divine swords she had collected in her previous life, the demon sword explained that only by awakening the sword spirit could one truly recognize its master. And it was the only sword spirit she had awakened in her previous life. Then the magic sword calmly uttered the most terrifying threat. Once she lost her memories, she would turn back into that ignorant young lady. By then, the magic sword could easily devour her. Echineacea fell silent. She knew this magic sword named Walder far too well. Essentially, it was a bloodthirsty sword that craved blood. The moment she relaxed her vigilance, she could once again be controlled by the magic sword and become a terrifying killing monster. As long as this cursed sword remained in her hand, the peaceful life she desperately longed for would always remain a distant luxury. Wanting to escape this nightmare, there was only one way: go to Echineacea Hall. All the discovered divine swords were sealed there, hidden deep within the Temple of Heaven. As long as she could enter the hall, she could choose Excalibur again and seal this magic sword forever. But there were only 3 ways to enter Echineacea Hall. The first was to find a lost divine sword and hand it over to the temple. The second was to wait until the owner of Excalibur died or retired and returned the sword. As for the third method, she had to become an official Knight of the Sky, thereby gaining the qualification to select Excalibur. For Echineacea now, only this final path was possible. Looking at the magic sword in her hand, she couldn't help but ask in a low voice, "Are the other Excalibur masters also reborn with the memories of their previous lives?" The demon sword replied angrily, "It depends on whether they awakened the sword spirit. If they did, they'll remember everything." Hearing this answer, Echineacea's heart sank completely. She had to remember that there were 4 masters of the divine swords among the knights: Baron, Teresa, Dietrich, and the terrifying leader Julian. Looking at the contract mark on the back of her hand, Echineacea felt increasingly uneasy. Those people might regain their memories of their past lives at any moment. Especially Julian. If he also remembered everything from the past, she was certain that he would kill her without hesitation the moment they met. The magic sword inside her couldn't help but sneer. "Who made you betray them in your previous life? Do you really expect him to welcome you with a smile?" Echineacea was unable to refute him. As long as the other party didn't attack her directly when they met, she would already consider herself lucky. If she wanted to seal the magic sword, she first had to join the knights. But at the same time, she absolutely could not be recognized by any of her former acquaintances. This difficulty was simply harder than climbing to the sky. Just when she was completely at her wit's end, a brilliant plan suddenly flashed through her mind. Looking at her long pink hair in the mirror, Echineacea suddenly realized something important. The memories those people had of her were only of the terrifying killer holding the magic sword, covered in blood. As for the eldest lady of the Earl family, Echineacea, they had never met her in their previous life. In other words, as long as she maintained her current appearance, the other party would never be able to recognize her. If that was the case, then why not simply act it out? She decided to disguise herself as an arrogant, proud, and sarcastic aristocratic genius. Even if this kind of personality was irritating and difficult to approach, it would never arouse anyone's suspicion. What did it matter if she was hated? As long as she could successfully hide her true identity, that was far better than being treated as a monster wielding a cursed magic sword. Now that she had decided to take this path, Echineacea directly showed Azanka's admission notice. This sudden move frightened the maid Nora and all the servants standing nearby. Before anyone could even react, she had already decided to get into the carriage. She only left a brief greeting for Nora to deliver to her parents before running toward that cruel military academy without looking back. The magic sword inside her couldn't help asking, "Are you really planning to just walk away like this?" Echineacea remained surprisingly calm, because she was the only one leaving, while her family remained safely within the territory. In fact, several days before setting off for Azanka, she had already made complete preparations. Nicole had just returned from the wizard's tower when Echineacea secretly came to find her. After hearing the plan, Nicole was completely confused. It turned out that her friend had not only become the new owner of the magic sword, but she also suspected that someone was secretly plotting against the entire Earl's mansion. Echineacea admitted all of this without hesitation. This time, she was going to Azanka to study, but what worried her most was the safety of her family. So she hoped Nicole could stay behind and secretly protect everyone. Nicole thought the entire plan was ridiculous. The power of the magic sword could get out of control again at any moment. She was even more worried about Echineacea's real purpose in going to Azanka. "You aren't planning to go there and surrender yourself to the knights, are you?" Echineacea shook her head helplessly. She had even hidden this matter from her own parents. "I only trust you, Nicole." Nicole was completely confused. She couldn't understand why Echineacea would place such unreserved trust in her. In fact, the reason was far deeper than Nicole could ever imagine. She wasn't merely a mage supported by the Earl's family. She and Echineacea were also childhood friends who had grown up together with Lancelot. During those carefree days of the past, Nicole had long considered this place her home. But who could have imagined that in the previous life, when the entire Rhodes family was brutally wiped out, Nicole had seemed to completely lose control, chasing the monster Echineacea had become across the entire world. In fact, there was another crucial secret. Nicole was the only person who had hurt her in her previous life. But that secret could never be revealed now. Echineacea looked at her red-haired friend standing before her and bluntly said that the only person she could trust now was her. Hearing this, Nicole sighed heavily and finally gave in. But trust was trust. Realistic problems still stood directly in front of them. Nicole couldn't help asking worriedly, "The Knights of the Sky are all geniuses who practice swordsmanship. How on earth do you plan to get in?" Hearing the question, Echineacea simply smiled mysteriously. She slowly put on her gloves without the slightest hesitation, because in her eyes, she was much stronger than those so-called geniuses. Echineacea finally showed up at the temple. All around her were harsh whispers and curious stares. Everyone was secretly talking about her. Is this young lady out of her mind? How dare she dress so ostentatiously in such a solemn temple? Although the high-profile appearance had been part of her plan, being stared at like a strange spectacle by so many people was indeed rather frustrating. To quickly solve the hidden dangers caused by the magic sword, she even planned to advance her schedule and strive to become a sword master at the age of 22. Just then, a clear voice suddenly came from behind. "Are you Miss Echineacea?" The visitor immediately introduced herself and said her name was Alice Winterbell. She was also Echineacea's future roommate. Although she knew it was somewhat rude to disturb someone while they were eating, Alice still spoke frankly. "I have something to talk to you about." Echineacea took the initiative to ask, "What's the matter, Miss Winterbell?" Alice pointed toward the mountains of luggage scattered throughout the room. "What's with all this luggage in our room?" Echineacea looked completely indifferent. "I admit that I did bring a little more clothes and jewelry." Alice frowned and seriously reminded her a trainee knight doesn't need this many clothes at all. In the end, Echineacea simply smiled slightly and answered with complete confidence. "But I just need it." Alice stared at her in silence. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Echineacea calmly adjusted her gloves and glanced at the enormous pile of luggage. She even stated directly, "I have no intention of wearing those tattered trainee uniforms. And there's nothing in the rules that says you're not allowed to wear skirts." As soon as these words came out, Alice became a little angry. She retorted that this was not in line with the status of a qualified knight. Echineacea was calmly cutting the meat on her plate while asking slowly, "So what exactly is a qualified knight?" Alice immediately puffed up her chest and answered, "That means staying true to chivalry, knowing how to live a simple life with honor, protecting the weak, and pursuing excellence in martial arts." Alice also deliberately used Teresa as a role model. "I think that's what a knight should look like." Echineacea retorted slowly, "There's nothing in the rules that says you're not allowed to wear nice clothes." Alice was so angry that she slammed the table and declared that vanity and luxury were not worthy of appearing here at all. As a result, Echineacea became even more confident. She casually said, "I usually wear these anyway. It would be even more wasteful to go out of my way to buy new uniforms." Those words immediately made Alice furious. She loudly asked her how she could possibly practice swordsmanship properly while dressed like this. Echineacea replied with an utterly indifferent expression, "I feel very comfortable." Alice was choked to the point of being completely speechless. Echineacea only found the whole situation amusing. In fact, she could see through the other person's mind at a glance. She knew Alice must be wondering, how can someone like her possibly get first place? But seeing all of Alice's emotions written so clearly across her face, Echineacea instead thought that her new roommate was rather cute. Still, Echineacea was getting tired of being picked on all the time. She decided to give Alice a little color. So she took the initiative and suggested, "Why don't we have a direct discussion?" And she deliberately added, "I'll wear this skirt myself." Alice couldn't sit still anymore. She immediately asked, "Do you think I can't even beat someone wearing a skirt?" Echineacea smiled slightly. "I just think I can win." Alice was so furious that she threw her gloves aside. She accepted the challenge on the spot and loudly declared that she would duel with Echineacea. She even announced that if she won, Echineacea not only had to apologize, but also could no longer wear those fancy clothes. Echineacea naturally took advantage of the situation and put forward her own condition. "If I win, you mind your own business from now on." The duel was set for that evening. The location would be the training ground behind the dormitory. This sudden movement immediately aroused heated discussions among the people around them. Just when Echineacea was wondering who she could find as a witness, a young man named Ian walked over with a confident smile. He took the initiative to propose that, as a trainee knight commander, he would serve as the referee for their duel. Echineacea turned her head warily and asked who he was. The visitor introduced himself with a friendly smile. "My name is Ian. I'm a third-year trainee knight commander." It was perfect for him to serve as the referee. When Alice heard that the other party was a knight commander, she quickly bowed politely and thanked him for being willing to step forward. Ian had no airs about him at all. He simply set the time for the evening and the location at the training ground behind the women's dormitory. Alice nodded in agreement. Then she turned her head and stared directly at Echineacea. Apparently, she was already planning to give her a good lesson in the upcoming duel. Although Echinacea felt that showing her strength early could actually be a good thing, she was also slightly worried. Would this cause even more trouble for her later? Just when she was feeling troubled, the magic sword inside her suddenly became restless again. It was constantly screaming inside her head, desperately demanding to see blood. It even encouraged her to kill people directly. Echinacea didn't bother paying any attention to it. She simply shut it up. But before she could enjoy even a moment of peace, a voice suddenly came from the side. It mocked her for making such a huge fuss immediately after entering the school. Echinacea turned around and looked over. She discovered that Ian hadn't left yet. She asked him cautiously, "Is there something else?" Ian smiled slightly and took the initiative to extend an invitation. "Are you interested in joining our club?" Hearing Ian's invitation, Echinacea repeated it with some confusion. Societies. Ian smiled and explained that it was perfectly normal for freshmen not to know about them. After all, Azanka Military Academy was completely different from ordinary schools. There were no regular courses and exams here at all. Echinacea nodded to show that she understood. Ian then explained that the school operated on a points-based ranking system. A ranking competition was held every 3 months, and students could also improve their ranking through duels. Of course, Echinacea already knew these rules. Ranking meant everything in this academy. The apprentice knights would be ranked according to their results and then take turns serving as squires to official knights. This wasn't simply about serving tea and pouring water. A squire was responsible for managing weapons and equipment. They could even participate in training and actual combat alongside their knight. With enough luck, they could even receive personal guidance from an official knight in swordsmanship. But unless a knight specifically chose someone, the allocation of squires depended entirely on the results of the ranking matches. If someone wanted to learn from a powerful knight, they had to obtain an extremely high ranking. This was exactly why everyone fought so desperately during the ranking competitions. Ian continued explaining. But it's not easy to train alone. You need someone you can compete with. And that's the meaning behind the existence of clubs. Not only can everyone train together, but sometimes you can even find mentors through clubs. Many students had already decided which club they wanted to join even before enrolling in the academy. After hearing this, Echinacea asked, "Is joining a club mandatory?" Ian smiled and shook his head. Although it isn't mandatory, various clubs will definitely compete for you. After all, you're the #1 freshman. And there's something very special about you. Echinacea became slightly curious. Is there anything more special than winning first place? Ian didn't answer directly. Instead, he took out a scroll and placed it on the table. After reading this, you'll understand. The words written on the scroll were extremely clear. First-year trainee knight Echinacea, selected as a squire by an official knight. As soon as the news spread, everyone around them was completely shocked. People began whispering among themselves. She's only just entered the academy. How could she already be directly selected as an attendant? Which official knight chose her? Echinacea herself immediately felt that something was wrong. Who had named her as their attendant? She even began to suspect that perhaps the holders of the other magic swords had also retained memories of their previous lives. But after thinking about it carefully, she quickly dismissed the idea. If that were really the case, they would have already started hunting her down. They wouldn't have waited until now. Then who is secretly making a move? Unable to suppress her curiosity, she asked, "Which knight named me?" Ian gave her a completely unexpected answer. Julian. The leader of the Imperial Knights. The moment she heard that name, Echinacea was completely stunned. Ian then explained that during the 1-month trial period, Echinacea would train with him first. Her official allocation would be decided later. He carefully explained the time and place of the training sessions, and even gave her shoulder a friendly pat. "Do you have any questions?" Echinacea remained silent. Seeing this, Ian smiled and said goodbye, making an appointment to meet her at the training ground that evening. But Echinacea's heart was already in complete chaos. Why had Julian chosen her as his squire? Was it because she had obtained first place in the entrance examination? Or because her performance during the test had been too impressive? Or was it the worst possibility of all? Julian had actually retained the memories of his previous life. If Julian truly remembered everything from their past life, then why would he do this? After all, she had betrayed his trust in her previous life. She had even destroyed everything. Although she had always secretly wanted to see him again, Echineacea had never imagined that their reunion would happen like this. Once she became his attendant, it meant she would have to remain by his side from now on. The thought alone made Echineacea feel deeply uneasy. But there were more important matters to deal with first. Evening soon arrived. Echineacea reached the training ground behind the dormitory right on time. Ian and Alice were already waiting there. When they saw her approaching, Ian smiled and greeted her. Echineacea was still wearing that gorgeous dress. A long sword rested naturally in her hand, making her look completely out of place against the rough training ground. Ian didn't want to waste any more time. He immediately proposed starting the duel. Because Alice had initiated the challenge, the rules stated that Alice would make the first move. Ian, acting as the referee, officially announced the beginning of the duel. He recited the solemn oath, praying for honor and justice to descend upon their swords. Alice immediately raised her sword and prepared to go all out. But before she could even make her first move, Alice suddenly became completely confused. Echineacea was standing there, and instead of attacking, she was actually saluting. Alice blinked in disbelief. "Are you saluting me?" Echineacea lowered her sword slightly and smiled. "Of course." Alice stared at her, completely baffled. This is a duel, not some formal ceremony. Not only did she not assume a fighting stance, but she slowly lifted up her skirt and performed an elegant, ladylike ceremony right there on the duel field. Echineacea's unexpected move left the apprentice knights, watching from the sidelines, completely stunned. Some of them shook their heads and began complaining. Does she think this place is a dance hall? Alice felt even more insulted. How could someone like this possibly get first place? This was simply unacceptable. She no longer hesitated. She drew her sword and rushed forward. The two swords clashed fiercely in the air, producing a sharp metallic sound. But no matter how hard Alice attacked, Echineacea, despite wearing such a complicated dress, seemed completely at ease. With nothing more than a light sideways dodge, she avoided the attack effortlessly. Alice almost lost her balance. She was becoming anxious now, because every single one of her attacks was being avoided with frightening ease. Alice quickly created some distance and stared intensely at the opponent in front of her. "Are you looking down on me?" Echineacea suddenly came back to her senses. She really had been thinking about something else just now. "But I apologize." Yet to Alice, those words sounded even more like a deliberate provocation. If that was the case, then she would simply end the battle as quickly as possible. Before the crowd of onlookers could clearly see what happened, Echineacea suddenly disappeared from her position and approached in an instant. Alice didn't have time to react. She could only hurriedly raise her sword to resist. The attack came as fast as lightning. Echineacea had thought she could defeat her opponent with a single move. Unexpectedly, Alice managed to block it abruptly. But that brief exchange was enough. Echineacea completely saw through her opponent. Alice's swordsmanship was far too disciplined. Every next move could almost be predicted in advance. Accompanied by the harsh collision of metal, Alice was gradually forced into a completely passive position. Panic finally appeared in her eyes. Between one breath and the next, Alice's sword was suddenly knocked away. Before everyone could even react, Echinacea's sword point had already stopped firmly in front of Alice's throat. The outcome had been decided. Alice could only grit her teeth, lower her head, and admit defeat. Although Echinacea politely sheathed her sword and apologized, this was still an enormous humiliation for Alice, because she knew very well that the other party hadn't been serious from beginning to end. This had been nothing more than a one-sided crushing. Ian, acting as the referee, smiled and applauded, clearly appreciating the performance of both sides. Echinacea didn't want to stay any longer. She was just about to turn around and leave when Ian took the initiative to follow her. He seemed to mention it casually. "I served as the attendant of the regiment leader Julian 3 times. In my eyes, Julian is an extremely rational person. That's why even I was confused by this appointment. Ian lowered his voice and asked tentatively, "Why did the leader choose you by name? Is there some unknown relationship between you two?" Facing Ian's probing questions, Echinacea coolly denied it. Ian laughed and didn't continue asking. He simply patted her on the shoulder and reminded her to meet him on time the next morning. Watching Ian's departing figure, Echinacea's eyes gradually turned cold. She was far too familiar with that false smile. Because 3 years from now, when the magic sword completely destroyed Azanka, Ian would become one of the cruelest knights under its influence. When disaster struck, in order to buy himself enough time to escape, he would even turn against innocent people. He would become nothing more than a butcher desperately trying to survive. But when the magic sword finally turned toward him, that proud knight would collapse instantly. His courage would disappear, leaving only fear. In the end, the magic sword would give him no chance. A flash of cold light would bring his sinful path to an end. Echinacea suppressed her disgust and quietly said goodbye to him. Whenever she remembered that this seemingly respectable man would commit such terrible acts in the future, she felt deeply uncomfortable. She quickly arrived at the lively central square, hoping to calm herself down. However, the magic sword inside her began sneering again. It asked whether she wanted to vent her anger by killing again. Echinacea immediately shouted at it inside her mind to shut up. What I want isn't killing at all. What she truly wanted was much simpler. She only wanted to see these intact buildings again. She wanted to see ordinary people living happily. She wanted to experience the peaceful world that had once been taken away from her. Thinking of this, she couldn't help laughing at herself. It's really boring. Just then, a deep male voice suddenly came from behind. It called her name directly. Echinacea. She turned around in surprise. Standing behind her was none other than Julian, the leader of the Imperial Knights. Julian suddenly asked her, "Do you know my true identity?" Echinacea's heart immediately tightened. Before discovering what the other party truly knew, she absolutely couldn't reveal even the slightest flaw. So she calmly shook her head and pretended not to understand. But Julian didn't seem convinced. Instead, he stepped forward, slowly closing the distance between them. "I'm sure we've met before." Echinacea instantly became alert. If this man truly carried the memories of his past life, then her situation was becoming extremely dangerous. But Julian suddenly chuckled. He mentioned the Emperor's birthday party from the previous summer. "We've already met there." Echinacea was suddenly stunned. So he had noticed her back then. Julian explained quietly that although he hadn't known her name at the time, she had left a deep impression on him. He even asked whether she didn't remember seeing him. Echinacea secretly panicked. There had been no meaningful eye contact between them at that time. So how could he remember her so clearly? Not wanting to arouse suspicion, she quickly pretended to realize it and apologized profusely to the group leader. But Julian interrupted her directly. "From now on, just call me Julian." Echinacea quickly declined politely. She said that she was only a trainee knight and that calling him by his first name would be far too rude. Julian looked at her thoughtfully. Then he raised an even more dangerous question. "Why did you apply to the military academy?" Looking at her own gorgeous attire, Echinacea instantly became more vigilant. Was he beginning to doubt her motives? Facing Julian's sharp scrutiny, Echinacea quickly came up with a random excuse. She said that she simply wanted to become a knight. But Julian obviously had no intention of letting her escape so easily. "Why do you want to become a knight?" Echinacea could only answer honestly enough to avoid suspicion. "I like swords very much." Hearing this answer, Julian suddenly stretched out his hand. Without warning, he gently caught her wrist. His voice became low and cold. "These delicate palms. They don't look like the hands of someone who has practiced swordsmanship for years." Then he stared directly at Echinacea. "Why on earth do you want to become a knight?" This sudden question nearly shattered Echinacea's carefully built defenses. She subconsciously pulled her hand back. If he carefully examined her right hand, her secret could no longer remain hidden. Faced with Julian's intense questioning, Echinacea was speechless for a moment. It would have been easy to casually invent another lie. But looking at the man standing before her, for the first time, she didn't want to lie. Because in this life, she only wanted to live happily for herself. She wanted to pursue her own true happiness. Even if that reason sounded ridiculous. Even if it was nothing like the answer a qualified knight should give. She looked into Julien's clear eyes. Those were the same eyes that had once trusted her without conditions in her previous life. She truly couldn't bring herself to deceive him again. Echinacea took a deep breath. Then she looked at him seriously. This is what I really want. Julien didn't continue pressing the subject. Instead, he asked why she had appeared here. Not wanting to be outdone, Echinacea immediately asked him the same question. As the new leader, why do you have time to come to this wilderness? In truth, she knew exactly why she had come. She simply wanted to see the fountain that hadn't yet been destroyed. But that truth could never be spoken. So she casually lied. I just happened to be walking here. Unexpectedly, Julien followed her words and smiled. Then I suppose I came here for a walk too. Looking at that gentle smile, Echinacea was completely stunned. In her memories, this man had never smiled like this before. What made her even more uneasy was the strange coincidence. On the very day he had appointed her as his squire, he had appeared in the exact place where she had been killed in her previous life. Was this really just a coincidence? Did he truly know nothing? Or was he deliberately testing her? If Julien really retained the memories of his previous life, then everything was spiraling completely out of control. Echinacea finally stopped trying to guess. She stared directly into his eyes and asked, "Why did you choose me as your attendant? I need a reasonable explanation." Julien looked at her wary expression. But instead of answering, he suddenly made a strange request. "Would you like to spar with me?" Echinacea was completely confused. The dignified leader of the Imperial Knights had actually asked to spar with a student. Julien calmly removed his coat. "I'll naturally give you the answer after the match." However, he didn't immediately draw his sword. Instead, he placed his cloak gently around her shoulders. "It's windy tonight. Let's stop here for today." Julien's puzzling behavior left Echinacea completely confused. Even the magic sword inside her began wondering what this man was planning. Echinacea silently tightened her grip on the cloak. She had to admit it. This man was becoming more mysterious with every passing moment. And somewhere deep in her heart, a dangerous question quietly surfaced. Could Julien really have forgotten everything? Or was he simply waiting for her to reveal the truth herself?
Hi guys, thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe to my channel so that I can make more videos like this. If this video gets 300 likes, then part 2 will come. Please guys, give this video a lot of love, and from now on, videos will come on Sunday as well. The name of this manhwa is The Sword-Bearing Flower. So guys, this is it for this video. I will see you all in the next video. Bye guys!